One of the famous politicians in Senegal by the name Sonko has just commented on the war that is going on in the Middle East. And one of the main things that he's talking about here is African unity, because he's trying to compare what is happening in the Middle East and what if this happens in Africa? How can we even defend ourselves? Now, let's have a look at what Sonko is talking about. Then we can come back and analyze the video further so that we can, at the end of the day, spearhead this continent to other orbit level in matters unity, in matters development. Let's have a look at what Sonko is saying, then we can come back and analyze the video.
But we need to conduct a geopolitical analysis of these situations. These are not random situations. Just the day before yesterday in the assembly, I spoke to you about the Thucydides trap. I've been talking to you about it for quite some time now. I would like us all to be fully aware of the situation. We have emerging powers grouped around the BRICS, with China as a driving country, which today, whatever is said economically, technologically, and certainly increasingly on the military front, are on the rise. Not only are they catching up on all the delays, but they are also overtaking the old Western world, led by the United States of America. And everything you see is just reactions from this bloc, and especially from the United States, who are afraid of losing the primacy they've held for so long. This overwhelming domination over the rest of the world. And if you look closely at the map of interventions, the goal is to slow down and expel a power like China from South America. First of all, that's why what happened in Venezuela happened, what's currently happening in Cuba, and what could happen elsewhere, since Colombia has also been threatened. This is what's currently happening in the Middle East, where the aim is to effectively cut off all connections these countries have with China, with Russia, and perhaps with other BRICS countries. And the rapprochement over hydrocarbon products, Europe doesn't pose a fundamental problem, since Europe is, at least in this Western bloc, a satellite of the United States. Everything that's happening is an attempt to isolate a rising power, and then to be able to focus specifically on that power, whether in the context of a trade war, which would be fortunate if it were limited to that. We would not wish for it to go much further, especially with powers that possess nuclear arsenals and are mastering increasingly extremely sophisticated technologies. We are in this very particular geopolitical context as far as Africa is concerned, because we've talked about Europe, we've talked about America, we've talked about Asia. And as usual, it is very difficult to talk about Africa, since Africans have never taken responsibility to understand the issues at stake. And to understand that they have no friends, that they have no relatives, and that they must rely on themselves through the necessary reforms, by resolving a number of unnecessary disputes or conflicts, by ensuring stability, but above all by working, by getting to work. We are the continent that is hardly sharpening itself at all on the geopolitical map, but which seems to be the only one unaware of it. And once again, we are caught up in secondary debates that bring nothing to the world, that bring nothing to Africa, and that bring nothing to our countries individually. This Africa that has never truly emerged from under the yoke of colonization, because what is happening now is a kind of reiteration by certain empires of a colonial will. Colonization is not just physical. Even if here we are talking about the physical aspect, there is also this possibility of imposing one's views, one's desires on everyone else, and continuing to dominate the world, to control it, and to treat others as vassals or satellites. That is a form of colonization. Africa has never emerged from this colonization. And I blame myself for that. As proof, what scholars call neo-colonization, through colonial currencies, through the trap of natural resources, but also through the unjust debt imposed on Africa, the extremely difficult conditions for accessing these loans, and all the burdens that places on Africa. Africa has never emerged from this. And
Look, the good thing is we have leaders who are trying to take this continent to another level, to catapult this continent to another level. Leaders who are objective, leaders who are passionate with this continent and their countries. A good example of such leaders, we have President Traoré of Burkina Faso. This gentleman is trying his level best to make sure at least Burkina Faso is seen in the world map. And of course, we have to develop our countries so as we can be respected. Yeah, we have to develop our countries so as we can be respected. If not, man, We can never be respected. Look, even if you follow what is going in the UN General Assembly, you can realize that when African leaders are making speeches, the hall is literally empty. The hall is literally empty. Why is it empty? Because they don't have anything to offer. And indeed, if they have something to be offered, then that thing that has to be offered is something that can be ignored. Look, when African leaders are making speeches in the UN General Assembly, the hall is literally empty. The world leaders are not there. They cannot listen to African leaders because we are disunited, unfortunately. That is so bad, we as Africans. We are disunited. Compare that to when the Prime Minister of Little Israel, the Little Israel, Prime Minister Netanyahu, just compare that to when Netanyahu is speaking. The hall is literally full. Why? Because Netanyahu has something to offer. So, brothers and sisters, Africa must be great. We have to unite. And we have to unite as soon as possible. You see, the problem with we as Africans is simple. We normally talk a lot and we don't implement what we are saying. Look at what we call the Lagos Plan of Action in the year 1986, if I'm not wrong, where African leaders, they discussed on how Africa should open borders. They met and discussed on how Africa should remove both tariff and non-tariff barriers so as goods can go to the market. Way back in the 1986, 40 years later, we are still grappling with the same things. Good on paper, but implementation is totally zero. That is the problem with we as Africans. But at the same time, the good thing is we have leaders who are spearheading this fact that Africa as a continent should unite. Leaders like President of Burkina Faso, Traoré. Look at what this gentleman is doing in Burkina Faso. Development after development, development after development, even though he was not elected democratically, even though he came into power through coup. Look at what he's doing. The country is booming, the economy is booming, the mining sector is booming, and is being loved by the Burkinabes people. So, in a nutshell, what I'm saying is this. So we as Africans should come together. This journey started way back. Our forefathers started this journey. So it is up to our duty, we as the remaining generation, to push this agenda to another level. At the end of the day, we as Africans, sometimes we might not even enjoy the fruits of what we are doing. Actually, we can fight for this, but our children's children will be the one who will be coming to enjoy the fruits. But we must continue fighting. We must continue fighting because Africa must be great. It must be great from the Maghreb. Africa must be great from the southern part. Africa must be great from the east and the western part so that we can be respected when it comes to global arena.